okay, as somebody who gets paid to make music sound as good as it possibly can, there's this thing that happens, which is all music starts to fit into this universal bubble of sounds huge, sounds good, sounds produced, right? And there becomes less variety within the music that you listen to. And so you could be sitting there on shuffle on your favorite streaming app, whatever that is, and you're just shuffling through and everything starts sounding the same. And it's much less of an artistic expression, and it's much more people that are just fighting to try and get as many streams.
It's a bunch of Soothe, Gullfoss, and Ozone. Welcome back to the home studio Hangout. I'm your host, Drew, here with guest co-host of the day,
oh my gosh,
Mr. Andrew Chapman. Good to have you back.
I've been promoted. This is amazing.
Promotion
from guest to co-host.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Look out, Josh.
Look out.
I'm coming for you.
Josh is
Not
still in his post-wedding nuptials. So
congratulations.
Congratulations to Josh and Maddie. And I am dubbing Andrew it's the Andrew and Andrew show today.
I feel like you need to do that thing that they do with the knights with the sword, but like just get like a shotgun mic or something, you know?
Yeah. Get one of those Sennheiser shotgun mics and just like
yeah.
There you go.
I would love to be knighted with a 416.
There you
wow, go. This is already the dorkiest podcast of all time.
So incredibly nerdy specific. Oh god. Yeah, dude. No, I'm excited to have you back and have you upgraded. We haven't chatted in a minute, so I think up first, what's been going on with you since we chatted last, man?
Oh man, just more than anything, just kind of going about the day to day. A little bit of mental anguish, a little bit of trying to keep up and be like the super version of myself, and then just realizing that is kind of an uphill battle. But before we dive into just absolute depression, honestly, things have been pretty good. Like taking a step back has been incredibly helpful. So yeah, it's fantastic.
That's awesome. Yeah,
how have you
going
been?
Well?
Yeah, teaching's good. Yeah, teaching media tech. I finished up my first semester, and big success. I actually got my student reviews back, and I got really high marks across the board, which is yes. I have never been a teacher ever before in my life, and it's really incredible because we're gonna go on a little side tangent real quick because
go for it.
I started TikTok a year ago, a little more than a year ago, and I look back on those first videos and I cringe super hard because I was just awkward. I didn't know how to talk to a camera. I didn't know how to just be myself on social media. I'm just everybody's got that awkwardness that they just have to get over that hump, right?
Yeah.
But one of the first videos that I actually made on TikTok was talking about audio school and is it really worth it? And that video got the attention of the audio school that I went to, which then led to a relationship with the director of education, Mr. Wes Martin, if you're listening, hello, and a job offer of teaching audio 101.
That's amazing.
It's incredible. So
that's wild. And then you said you've been filling in the gaps with school while still working, which is, in my opinion, the ultimate teacher is the one who is teaching and both practically still working.
Indeed.
Especially in audio, at least.
It is, yeah. Which I feel is just a requirement these days, honestly. It's I feel like we're all, I can speak on behalf of everybody, I'm sure, but we're all kind of shooting for, I just want to do music and I just want to do it full time and I just want to be creative and do all the fun stuff. I love playing with knobs and switches, and I love talking about preamps and microphones, as I'm sure anybody who's listening already knows. But it's it's so tough to make it your career.
Oh yeah.
And so there is, I would say, the first big majority of your time of doing this as a career is quite literally just trying to figure out how to survive and fill in the gaps, because there's a lot of gaps to fill in, and all that kind of fun stuff too.
Well, and you're able to shorten the gap of early figuring it out, what does this do? What does this do? What does this do? Kind of stuff into like a lot shorter of a time. I mean, you said what the class was like a 6 to 8 month course or something like that.
Yeah, so I don't know exactly. Yeah, I kind of lost track. Yeah, the first few months were literally me like recording videos of like kind of instructional and how to and like, I mean, if you taught an audio 101 course online through an accredited university, like you want to make sure the production's there and the education and everybody learns everything. But the thing that I found to be super interesting is like going back to the absolute basics. Like, this is what an XLR cable is. Like,
this
you
forget
is how it
works.
That, like, yeah, and like you forget that not everybody knows that already.
Yeah.
Which is, it's just such a crazy, crazy thing. And so it's like, here's how you plug in a microphone. These microphones require phantom power, like real 101 type stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And like the phase switch thing. So whenever I learned about the XLR, like the way it cancels out noise, I like that there's a phase, like a built-in kind of phase realignment in the cable itself. I was like, that's crazy. Whoever thought of that is like a genius.
Like
somebody's a mega nerd
for sure. And like the other thing too is like when we were going, like there was 2 subjects that seemed to like new students have a hard time with, and I kind of feel like I fit into this category too. And it was like signal routing, like analog signal routing.
Oh yeah.
Also, trying to teach analog signal routing online is very difficult.
Oh, I'm sure.
Because like when you have a console, it's like, you just start at the top, you work your way down, and here's what a patch bay does, and this is how this goes. When you don't have access to those tools and being like in that room, like, oh man, that is a tough thing. One of the things that I found to be so interesting is it wasn't until we got into like DAW basics that everything finally tied together. And I was like, here's a digital console in Pro Tools. And everybody's like, oh.
This is why you had me learn
like
these things. And
Exactly. Yeah, it's wild.
That's super cool. Yeah, I will say whenever I did my like first education courses and stuff in like audio, that was being able to put the best part about it was being able to, I was physically there. I learned in a classroom and a studio with a console. And so being able to put hands to like knobs and faders and stuff.
Oh, it's huge.
Yeah, it was massive just for being able to like really figure all that. Well, dude, that's really cool that you're kind of at the forefront of changing audio school in way, in my opinion.
That's right. Yeah. I'd like to take credit for that. I am at the forefront. I am changing music as we know it. The future of music is being created by me and my students. In a way, I think that that's ridiculous and the most pretentious thing I've ever said, but there's also a hint of truth to it. So,
there is. From an accredited school perspective.
Sure. Yeah.
Like, there's a ton of courses online made by guys who work, for sure. But they aren't accredited there, and they're sometimes inaccessible to people because they're very expensive.
And sometimes I'll say it, like, being like a teacher going through kind of the motions, it's like there were guys that were in my class that had some of that knowledge. Like, of course, like, there's guys that know what a TRS cable is or an XLR or whatever, and like phase. Sure. Yeah, I got it. But I was so surprised, like going through everything, like, not to shout out any of my previous students, I'll never talk trash about it, but like I did have a student that didn't know that Q represented bandwidth. And like, it's just like those little things that just kind of slide by that you might not know that you do get some value out of. I mean,
for sure,
other things as well, but yeah,
and like super cool.
Yeah, and when you take some of those like online courses, because like in like my research of like becoming a teacher, like I looked at a lot of the courses that were online that some of the more like known internet figures were kind of like pushing, and there's a lot that is useful, and then there's a lot that just gets passed over, and it's just there is something about having like a full, like an instructor that you're with one-on-one that you can ask questions with and interact with. It really just opens up in its own world, for sure.
Well, and then you can be like, here's a hyper specific question that's like,
indeed,
kind of only understood by me and you in this, singular instance right now. Whereas like it's hard to do that.
So many.
It's hard to do that in a online platform kind of thing. Even though I will say I've done. Now there are people. Shout out Jay Moss, who I learned from. I did some mixing stuff from him. He does one-on-one mixing lessons over the internet, and they are somewhat expensive, but they are also, I would argue, incredibly worth it, because you're working with a guy working, especially if you like punk and rock music. Like he's done everybody in that genre at some point. Not to mention, like counterparts and his own bands that he's also done work with. So you should look up his credits if you don't know who he is. He's done. If you know underground music, you probably know who he is. But he definitely taught me a lot about mixing a very specific way. And then also because I would send him stuff and we would like go over it together. And he'd be like, "Try this on your mix." It's a mix, and it's a mix that I'm working on for a client.
Yeah,
like actively.
Yeah, it is a thing, and it was, truthfully, God, it's so cheesy, but like it is genuinely an honor to like help out like students with a lot of that kind of stuff. Like I just saw a music video released by one of the students of like the first song that he's like produced on his own, and it looks great.
That's
killer. Like, all over TikTok. Yeah, it was like, oh, that's rad.
Dude, proud teacher moment, right?
Oh, proud teacher. Yeah, again, just saving the world and changing the future of music. That's I will take 100% credit for it.
There we go.
That's right.
Well, big thing I wanted to talk to you about it today, and I mentioned it to you before we started, and you were like, man, that's a good conversation. There's a lot to be said about that, is from my perspective, and looking at the way the general consensus of mainly producers, I feel like this probably permeates through multiple different, places, but obviously I mainly see producers, mixers, and musicians and stuff. And I feel like everybody has hit this wall of being so tired. And there's been a lot of conversation about slowing down, whether that's slowing down on output for socials or slowing down personally or slowing down like in all, like I feel like slow has been the word for the last like 6 to 8 months that I've heard more and more and more.
Yes. Yeah. For me, like it was this thing, and I like posted a TikTok about it. I think you commented on it, where it was like I basically said like, yeah, like there's a reason why I didn't post for 6 or 8 weeks or however long that it was. And I went from like a year ago posting quite literally 3 times a day. Like, cause I like heard somebody say like, if you dedicate like an hour of your time every day to quite literally just social media of the thing that it is that you do, like you'll see like your business like explode. And that is correct, I think.
Yes.
Like I can definitely vouch for that. The last year of my audio career has been arguably one of the biggest and full of the most change. So that's wild. But the other side of that I'm realizing is that it comes at an expense. And like these are lessons that we could have learned from like, God, like I don't know if you ever watched like old YouTube days, like Casey Neistat, for example. Like
whenever he did the daily vlogs,
daily vlogs for like 3 years, a little more than 3. I forget how long it was.
Crazy.
It's like and it's like for me, it was like making 3 videos a day that are like talking about microphones or a preamp that, hey, check out this transformer, it's got this kind of sound. And a lot of
the times it's like no edits or like less edits because it's just on your phone. So like even lower barrier of entry compared to what he was shooting, which is like small films once a day.
Exactly. And it's like his have like narrative. Like they have a beginning, middle, and end. It is telling a story. I am not telling a story. I'm just like, hey, here's the thought. That was cool. All right, bye guys. And like that's it. But like when everything in your life is surrounded by this one big creative endeavor or creative pursuit, it tends to drain the battery. And unfortunately, you do require a certain kind of barrier to entry of like how much energy you have to be able to pursue something creative, if that makes sense. Where it's like you need like creativity comes from the life experience that you have. And if all of your life experience is surrounded by trying to produce something creative, it just ultimately results in less life experience, which then just starts this kind of vortex of, like draining the energy that you have for those creative pursuits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I mean, even looking at Casey, I feel like, and if you look at the highest output people, right? I would argue Casey at that point was super high output, but now you're looking at, your Hermosi as being like the most highest output guy I've ever seen in my entire life. Or a Gary V or somebody on that level of just like,
oh yeah, God,
insane output, like content wise across like 7 platforms and podcasts and audio and everything. It's nuts.
And I think that like we've had the last few years that have almost been defined almost entirely by output. And it's like everybody's like, oh, you got to release, like, God, I feel like the rules have changed so much for music, and it's like every 10 years I feel like they change. But like, like I remember like distinctly, this is join me in an old man kind of yelling at the cloud. So let's yell at the cloud together. But it's I distinctly remember paying $18 for a compact disc, like CDs as the kids call them. And like I distinctly remember like going to stores, like CD stores, and being excited about seeing certain records for sale. And like that was what it was for the longest time. And then that kind of evolved into, oh, okay, so iTunes, or like even before that it was like ringtones, if you remember the ringtone craze. And then like going from like that, and it was iTunes, and it was like, well, we're
iTunes singles and
exactly. And that turned into, well, streaming platforms are a thing. And you think about it and you're like, okay, yeah, that is the thing that benefits the listener, I guess, the most in a lot of ways. But at the same time, we do, and this is the conversation, this is not a new conversation, but that is the thing that unfortunately leads to us missing out on great art, because a lot of great art is a little bit longer form. I miss full albums so much. I love seeing new singles come out from some of my favorite artists. But it's just like, gosh, I do miss being able to just put on music on a long drive and listen to it from start to finish. And pick
on
up
that,
favorites.
I've noticed more people putting out EPs rather than singles, or like 2 or 3 singles and then like a 7-song like EP.
Right.
I've noticed that more and more, people wanting album cuts. I think even Josh said it on the podcast. He predicted like it may have been this year. He said, I want to see album cuts come back. I love album specific songs. That is like, this is not a single. This is a weird song. I love those songs.
Yeah. And like, me too. Like, I think back to like all of like some of my favorite records. Like, I mean, I'll just, age myself real quick. But when I was 13 years old, a young boy, I listened to a band that was not very well known at the time called Blink-182. Yeah. And they had just put out a record called Dude Ranch.
Oh, yeah.
And and this is like their single had come out, Damn It. And it was great, and it was getting radio play, and it wasn't like an underground, like, I was 13. I didn't have access to underground music, but it was like the closest thing to it at the time. I bought that record, and my favorite song on there was not ever a single. God, what was it called? I have to look it up now. It was like, because I also like the other single, which was like Josie. It was like track 10. That's the thing. I remember the track number. So if anybody remembers Blink-182's Dude Ranch, hold on, I'm looking it up right now because it's gonna bother me.
Somebody is screaming at you from their headphones.
Continue to scream. Comment it down below. Give us the engagement.
Can you get it? Can you get it while you're watching this before Andrew gets it? 3.
All right, I found
2, 1.
Apple Shampoo.
What a great song name, also.
Yeah. Great. Phenomenal song. I loved it. It was so heartfelt, and it had one of my favorite lyrics of that whole record, which is like, it was so emo, which of course like opened the doors to other bands down the line, Lagwagon, MXPX, like just going down into the skater punk kind of West Coast thing and emo punk stuff, Newfound Glory, sure. Yeah. And then the Warped Tour, and then all that opened up. But anyways, the point that I'm making though is that like those days kind of ended, and then they evolved, and then those days ended, and then they kind of evolved, and it's just kind of like this ever continuing cycle. And like right now, I feel like we're in a really interesting time where it's like the releasing singles is now I'm starting to recognize the end of that, and I think that we're about to see a newer trend. I don't know what that is. Like, I'm not Nostradamus. I can't tell the future by any means, but like I'm starting to see like more people put out longer form like material, which I love, and I love that that's coming back. And I think that we're going to see that increase. I think a lot of people are like hungry for like genuine like art, and which is great. There's always going to be that demand, but I feel like it's just been so like single manufactured for, you know, commercial release, trying to get some sort of success. And that was like the reason for a lot of artists to do it a particular way. But I think now it's just like, oh, okay, even if you're, you know, an artist that puts out a single that has some success, like that success is very short-lived and that's not sustainable. We might as well just put out art.
Yeah. It's always a telling to me is what do, and this is kind of only a last couple of years thing, but it's maybe last 5 or 6 years, but it's also like, what do the things, the algorithms, the social media platforms push are the things that generally are being, the algorithms push what people want to see.
Yeah, I agree with that.
If people want to see short things, it pushes short things. Then the meta becomes, we push short things. But I've noticed a huge uptick recently in, even if you look at YouTube, massively long videos.
Yeah.
Like
same. Long form.
Like hour to 3 hours. TikTok extends their time to an hour or whatever, 30 minutes or whatever the heck it is.
30 minutes, really? Wow.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, it's long. It's pretty long. Like YouTube extends their shorts to 3 minutes, and
that's good. I always thought the 1 minute was just
the 1 minute's crazy. Yeah. Instagram's still at 1.5 minutes, which is kind of meh. But like, it says, oh, people want more depth. And have more to say that can be encapsulated in a 30 to 60 second clip. And people want conversation, which is why I think you have the boom of podcasting. Like, podcasts have like launched in the past like year and a half.
Every time that I start to think that the podcasting market is getting like oversaturated or that it's already big enough or whatever, it just keeps erupting. And it just seems like that is a trend that is going to continue. I don't think that we've capped out on podcasts. I don't foresee that happening. Like, speaking of like teaching, like we spent an entire class where I was just answering like Q&A about podcasting production because people had seen podcasts that I was on and things like that. I like went through it and I'm like, yeah, this is a huge piece of the puzzle from this point forward.
So I built an entire business this year on podcast production that is doing like really well. And I was able to get like 6-figure a year contracts with a company for that one podcast.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
Which is great for my business. And like, I have like 7 people that work for me for that company, but like, it's great for them because they don't have to own all the gear. They don't have to do all the stuff. They can come in one-stop shop. But podcast-wise, people get to sit with them for like 40 minutes to an hour and just like get to know them. And as a business owner or as somebody trying to like make art with people, like getting to know, like, is this the guy I want to make art with? Is this the guy I want to like have these conversations with? Or I respect this person's opinion. I want to hear his opinion on these things. Or, or like I like this guest and I like this host, seeing them together on differing opinions or in different contexts would be very interesting. And so like people like the literal narrative of what is the conversation, but also the overarching narrative of like the backgrounds of two people having a conversation as well.
Agreed. And also apologies for clapping. There's like a gnat that's like flying around. And I was just like, man, you're making such a great point, but I was just like, I can't hold back. Yeah.
That has to go.
That has to go.
No, but I see that in everything right now, like the book. So the book industry, you're seeing. There's a book that came out recently called "Please Unsubscribe." There's a book, Cal Newport's book "Slow Productivity," is like, I think it was voted one of the best like business development books of this year.
Yeah, and like kind of on that point too, and like a lot of what we're talking about, like I feel like the thing that's behind this, the driver of all these changes, is that like, God, I feel like 2020 was such a changing year for, God, a myriad of reasons. Of course. And I was talking to my wife about this last night. Like 2020, I remember the start of 2020 and the pandemic, and I was like working at a health food store at the time. And I remember this is something I'll never be able to get out of my head for as long as I live. I remember the cleanest like air and the clearest skies that I've ever seen, and the cleanest water that I've ever seen. Like that was an amazing thing, and it unlocked like this like part of our brains collectively. At the same time that happened, you also found yourself isolating from people more and more, yet you are craving connection, and therefore you found these things like TikTok and
Twitch
streaming and like, and so you found connection with all those things. And now I think that we're starting to realize that connection is kind of, I don't want to call it completely disingenuous as a person who really enjoys social media for all of the good that it brings, but like I feel like we as people are craving more genuine human connection than like, God, maybe ever before. That's kind of just the vibe and the feel that I get. I could be wrong. I don't know. I can't speak for everybody, but like I think that we're going to start to see a resurgence of a lot of things that we haven't really seen for a few years, like live shows. Like that's going to be, I think, coming back. God, I hope soon. Like, like music venues and people going out to see bands. Cause like, God, I feel like for the past 10 years, like the only bands that I've been able to see are like cover bands,
We've seen a resurgence of that here in my area, which is like, there's a lot of really good venues in the South, like Southeast specifically. Which I've also noticed is like a really good tell of if something is going to spread is like if you see it in the Southeast and maybe like two other markets like Texas market and maybe like West Coast, one of the West Coast markets, it's probably going to start spreading out to everywhere.
Yeah.
And we've seen a lot of venues consistently sell out shows, local only bands, and like 300 cap rooms selling out multiple times.
On top of that, I've seen a huge resurgence of like all things DIY. And like that is also for me just a huge tell, because like when you start to see like house shows popping up again, you're just like, oh, house shows, awesome. Like that's the grassroots type of stuff that like culture changing stuff builds up from that level.
People playing in grocery stores, people playing in old rundown churches, people playing in like literally a house or a garage.
And seeing that as opposed to someone chasing virality through like, social media platform has just been really encouraging to see. So I think that is like one of those big drivers that is going to encourage more of that long form content, more of that like full album produced as opposed to just releasing a single every month or every 3 weeks or whatever the formula that somebody decided was. Yeah.
And there's also like less produced content. And I've noticed like less produced music is also becoming a thing.
Which, God, like I gotta say this also just out loud, which is I'm a person who gets paid to make your stuff sound as good as it possibly can, which is wonderful. But like I recently found myself an old Pioneer reel-to-reel. It's like the RT 707 or whatever. They are not like known for, they're not Studers by any means. They're not top shelf. Like this is like old hi-fi type of stuff. Like it runs tape at 3.5 inches per second or 7 inches per second. So it's a little dark sounding, but like I've been running mixes through that to try and like it's kind of like everybody who's like doing like the film photography thing. Lately, it's like there's something about that. Like
I have one like, right over here. It's actually I'm gonna grab it.
You can't see it, but oh yeah, I'm gonna grab mine too. Oh man.
So same. I've gotten into this. My buddies recommended this to me, which is like a half frame Kodak Ektar, which is like a $40 camera. It's like nothing super expensive. It does half frame film, so on a 35 millimeter like roll, you get 70
shots. That's which in this day and age, the cost of film like that is huge.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. So like, but it's awesome and it looks good.
And likewise with this guy here. So this is like an old Kodak Signet. Same thing.
Yeah.
Half frame, 35 millimeter. And it is like, it does work. I promise. Hold on. There's the shutter. Anyways. Yeah. But same, like it's awesome. There is something magical and amazing about like, God, I saw a TikTok where somebody said this and I was like, it's beautiful. It's perfect. It's so cheesy, but it's perfect, which is like digital photography is a science and film photography is a chemical miracle. And I was like,
oh, wow.
That's hits
true.
right in the heart. Yeah,
that is true.
It is. And there is something that is exceptionally human about physical media that I think that we've been in a very digitized world. And again, because we have been so submerged in this digitized world, as I speak to you through this digital podcast,
yes,
there is something about it that leaves us craving the true physical medium and the physical contact and the physical connection with a lot of things. I mean, I think it's the reason why vinyl records made a huge comeback in the early 2000s and still today. Cassettes, which I have a cassette tape tattoo.
Yeah,
based on
there was a massive surge in cassettes. It's died off a little bit, but it's still a big thing.
It is, and you'll see like underground like mixtapes come out, and like people doing that with like zines, which is
I've also seen more bands doing splits more lately, which is really cool. In the heavier world, world, it's been really cool because then you'll do like you'll have one vocalist like feature on the other vocalist band, so you'll have like 3 bands on a 6-song split, and everybody gets 2.
Which, like, God, that needed to happen like 10 years ago. We've been needing this for a while. Yeah, and it's like, and those bands should tour together, and they should play shows together so they could play those songs on stage at the same time and create those wonderful, magical experiences. And, oh, God, yeah.
I've noticed a big uptick in a lot of that stuff, too. So, yeah, it's the slowness of, and then, like, people getting more, I think, with the internet and being so hyper aware of literally everything in our life, you've also seen the uptick in like slow food movement and like things like the light phone like coming out and people being like, hey, I'm tired of being so connected all the time. I want some time for myself. And once again, books have become massive like in the last year. In the last 2 years, really, and like obviously Book Talk is a massive part of that.
It really is.
But at the same time, it's a want for people to enjoy stories that they've never read before. If you look at like a Brandon Sanderson, right? Obviously massive fantasy author, but like the things that people tell, the things that TikTokers tell people to read from him is a book that came out in 2003.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Like his Mistborn, his first book came out in 2003, dude.
God,
and like,
I love that.
That's crazy. And like people are just finding out about this new to them story in 2024.
It's a magical thing that happens that way. I mean, like I think about that too with God, there was something that happened in music that was similar with Pine Grove. Are you familiar with them?
Yeah, I love them.
One of my favorite bands last 10 years, like easy, like top 3, which they should come back because I miss them dearly.
I've seen a massive resurgence in people listening to their music, and I don't know why.
I think it's like, okay, so again, we're talking about like, you know, the digital age that we're all a part of, whether we like it or not, right? And like there is something, even if the band is recorded digitally versus analog or whatever, I don't want to get into that conversation. Oh, I do. I love that conversation. But
yeah, sure.
Like with all that kind of stuff, it's also like there is something magical about a band that just put all their instruments inside of a studio and played live together. And like, there's no samples, you know, Not saying anything bad against samples. Please don't take this out of context. I do not want that hate. But like, samples are great. I love them. But there's something that's amazing about like a live drummer recorded with microphones that they could afford in a room that they could afford that created a very unique sounding recording.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like every other band, right?
Yeah.
That,
and it also doesn't sound in some ways. I mean, it's objective, but you could say, or it's non-objective. It's subjective. Sorry, it's subjective, but you could say, if you said it sounds great, I'd say you're probably right, and you could say it sounds terrible, and you could say I would also say you're probably right.
Right. I mean, like, God, okay, this actually ties back to what I was originally like gonna say, and I kind of forgot because the conversation just kind of ebbs and flows, which is great. But like, okay, as somebody who gets paid to make music sound as good as it possibly can, there's this thing that happens, which is all music starts to fit into this universal bubble of sounds huge, sounds good, sounds produced. Right. And there becomes less variety within the music that you listen to. And so you could be sitting there on shuffle on your favorite streaming app, whatever that is, and you're just shuffling through and everything starts sounding the same. And it's much less of an artistic expression, and it's much more people that are just fighting to try and get as many streams or as much attention from you as possible.
Goldfoss, and Ozone.
Which, like, they can have their place. Like, I used Goldfoss almost exclusively. So, okay, we're going to get nerdy about production real quick.
Yep.
So, Goldfoss, I downloaded it because I thought, I don't know, maybe I could use it. I was getting a lot of vocal tracks that were produced, I know for a fact, by using, like, cheap Audio-Technica mics.
Yeah.
Which can be harsh. And they're also going into...
On the wrong voice especially.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not necessarily every voice. It's a good disclaimer there. But like for a lot of voices, even for the voices they sound good, you need to be mindful and, play with mic position. Maybe mic higher and angled down can be a very beneficial thing to do a lot of times. Or offset. Play around with different pop filters. They do change the tone ever so slightly, like things like that. But, anyway, so I was dealing with a lot of vocals that were coming through that were harsh, extremely sibilant. And a lot of people were saying that Goldfoss was really good at that. And I would throw Goldfoss on there, and at first I was like, oh, yeah, wow, that's great. Like, it maintains the brightness. It just tames out some of these harsh frequencies. And then I realized after using it a little bit longer, like, I'd start to listen to a mix, and then I would, like, be like, God, it just, something's off. And I would almost always take off Goldfoss, and it would just fix the problem that I heard in my ears. And it was almost like that, like, oh, when you're listening to a vocal in solo, oh, yeah, it sounds a little better. But when you listen to it in the full context of the song, it was like, that. But the thing that I found that it was incredibly useful for was de-essing. And so what I would do is I would actually create like a send, like an aux send, for anybody who wants to dive into technique here. Create an aux send and kind of like a side chain aux send. So speaking more in analog signal flow kind of terms, not side chain in the way that most people think of compressors. Yeah. Anyways, or think of it as a copy of the vocal. We can say that.
Sure.
And so on the copy of the vocal, I high passed it to only have those higher kind of harsh frequencies, like 5K and above. Let's just say that. And then I would put Goldfoss on that. And so then what I would do is I would actually tame down the harsh frequencies in the main vocal track. I'd compress it. I'd get it to how I wanted it to sound. And then I would use that send or that copy, and I would slowly fade it in to actually bring up the amount of brightness that I wanted. And then kind of find that sweet spot.
So you're almost how people do the top and bottom bass split.
Yeah.
But you're doing it with a vocal and then
with
reverse.
A vocal and using it for specifically just like that top end, like the brightness.
4K and up, basically.
Exactly.
Of stuff. Yeah.
So you can like DS, you can tame some of the harshness without, because when you do that, especially when you get really harsh sounding vocals, when you start to tame it too much, it starts to make the vocal sound a little dark, a little flat, and it just needs some more energy and punch.
And you also end up turning up the vocal so much in the mix that it's like this vocal is eating the mix. Yeah.
Exactly. And then you're like, oh my God, why can't I get the guitars and the vocals to play nice together?
Yeah.
Like, it's that balancing act and getting things to sit where you need to, and then you start carving out some of the mids and the guitars to get the vocals, and then you're
they lose all the energy.
Apart.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then you find yourself in that pit of despair and that vortex.
Yeah.
And so it's like I kind of realized, I was like, okay, so Goldfoss does this really magical thing with the top end, which is really cool. But if I just throw it on the track and just kind of leave it, it sucks a lot of the life and the energy out of it. So it's like, I want the life and the energy, and I want that. But anyway, so when you start taming the high end too much, if you start pushing up the high end with like a high shelf, it starts to sound unnatural, not so good, like something. So it's like being able to just kind of blend it in where necessary. It's like the magic sucking thing that Goldfoss does kind of goes away. And then you can just kind of inch up some of that brightness, which is really nice. Yeah.
That's actually really nice. I do a version of that where I sidechain on hip hop songs. I sidechain the vocal bus to the instrument bus, which is like the track, and then I sidechain it, but I sidechain soothe to the vocal bus.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So I have the feed coming from my vocal bus.
I see.
And then I can use the blend amount on soothe to essentially set the vocal into the song a little more, and it's especially helpful if it's just like a 2-track print of like a beat bought offline or something like that, and you don't have a ton of room to like fit it in a space, but because you feel like if I'm going to carve out that space, I'm going to lose the energy of the track. So
that's interesting.
This kind of helps you like slice a piece into the track and like fit that vocal in really nicely
without it
detracting from the song itself. Doing the thing that you're talking about, which is like sucking all the life out of the track.
Yeah, which, like, I'll be honest, like, I never really liked Soothe as much, but Goldfoss, I was like, oh, man, this is great.
For sure.
They're similar in a lot of ways, but,
But back to the point is, like, people are using those as copy-paste things of, like, making and then they all start sounding the same and, using the ozone mastering thing and, like, everything gets mastered to crap and crushed and it's all, like, there's no life in anything. And you start going through a playlist on Spotify or Apple Music and you're just like, and everything sounds crushed and bright and also no energy
exactly. And it's just like at that point in time, it's like you just think of like Bruce Swedien, which I think I mentioned last time I was on this podcast, which he said this is Michael Jackson's producer and engineer, for anybody that doesn't know. He did like pretty much all of Michael Jackson's records, but after he produced Thriller and he was the engineer of Thriller, people were asking him all sorts of questions about his philosophies on mixing, mastering, production, everything, and he said that compressors are for children. And like I forget the exact quote, but it's like they're like, oh god, I gotta look it up. Hold on, we're gonna do that right now. I was like, compressors are for children, and he just did not believe that they had a place in modern music. And I was like, I was like, man, that's intense. I'm not gonna look it up right now, but
I'm gonna find that.
But and it just, honestly, it reminds me of like Rupert Neve and his approach to EQ, which is EQ is corrective. Like EQ is only for when like you've got all your mic positioning like exactly how you want it. You just need to correct something.
Yeah.
Which I'm like, that's interesting.
Enhance in some way. Yeah.
Well, and he
would argue that the enhancement should be done at the mic position.
Yeah, that was exactly correct. Yeah. And so I was like, with that being said, why did you hook them up through those glorious transformers and make it sound so good when you just crank the living snot out of stuff? Like,
especially the high shelf top end. Like, why did you make that top end shelf knob sound so good? You shouldn't have done that.
But yeah, exactly. Oh, like, God, that's exactly correct. Yeah, that
you shouldn't have done that because that's the reason I just like I immediately go like on my Avalon, same thing, top end shelf.
It's the
20K top end air shelf. Yeah, dude. Love it.
There you go. I think what is it? The 1073. I think it's a 12K if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. But nonetheless, God, I remember when I was in audio school and we had I think it was a 1081. I think it was a 1081 console. I'm not sure, but I just remember the first time that I had an SM7B on a vocal for a scratch vocal, and I was like, oh, that's kind of dark, and I just like cranked it, and I like the knob was like loose and it just went almost all the way up, and I was like, whoa, wait, why does that sound incredible?
That shouldn't sound that good.
that is overhyped. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to record it, but I was like, I'll split the difference. Yeah, I'm going to track it with that EQ because I was like, that's
for
amazing.
sure.
But anyways, back to the original point that we were making before we went on the fourth side tangent of this conversation, which is with all music that starts to sound the same and gets produced to, where compressors, although made for children, we're all children and we use the living shit out of them. I myself am guilty. One of my favorite sounds is cranking up an 1176 on a snare drum and getting slightly like a throwback kind of pumping sound. I love that sound with the crunchiness of it, right? So it's like all of these things said, music will start to sound the same when dynamics are removed and when everybody starts using the same sample pack and when everybody's kind of using the same exact techniques and the same mics and the same mic preamps and the same everything.
Yeah.
And it makes you crave a time where recorded music had to happen within studios, and therefore your music was limited to the studio that you could go to. And so there's this beautiful thing, and it's this pros and cons. This is a nuanced conversation. Nobody take this out of context, which is it's amazing. We all have this, wonderful tool that's you can get a cheap interface in an AT2020 and you can record a hit song. That is true.
There's tons of people
Billie Eilish.
Ask a million people that have made actual literal $1 million careers in the last 3 years out of it. Yeah.
It's life-changing, and it's a miracle of science.
And I love, and also that is also a technological advancement going back to the music consumption side of things that is only available because of streaming. A lot of these people would have never had the opportunity if streaming platforms weren't what it was. Just being realistic, like it wouldn't have functioned if streaming and social media functioning the way that it was. A lot of these people don't have jobs. Your Forrest Franks, your Nick D's, your Connor Prices don't become massive artists, pop artists specific and hip hop artists specifically, if they aren't able to say, I want to do music. I've always wanted to make music. Why? And I've done this other thing. I think Connor's he was an actor, and Nick's he was a photographer, and I think Forrest was like a camp counselor or something like that. And it's like all of these people are like, I've always wanted to make music for fun, and like I'm just gonna do it, and I'm just gonna put it out, and I'm gonna take it seriously, but I'm just gonna do it, and I'm gonna do it at the cost and availability that is afforded to me. Which is a pretty low barrier of entry. I'm just going to put it out on Spotify and Apple Music via a DistroKid type thing, distributor, and we'll see what happens. And then changes the trajectory of their entire life.
Yeah, which kind of rolls back into what we were talking about with digital photography versus analog.
Exactly.
Film. It's like digital recording and digital home studio recording is a scientific miracle, and there is something that is magical about going into a studio. It doesn't necessarily have to be tape or analog or anything like that. But when you go into a studio, even a budget studio, you end up with a much more unique product, and that gives it a human signature that I think that so much of our music is missing right now.
So, to that point, how much of what you just said is coming from using the studio or using a producer in that studio who knows that gear well?
I think it's a mix because, here's the deal. You and I both know with our experience that you can get into a really nice studio, and if you are plugging in, let's just say it's like a room that was designed by Russ Berger or like a famous acoustician or whatever it is, and you go over there with your laptop and you plug in your Focusrite 2i2 and you plug in an SM57, that will always sound like an SM57 plugged into a Focusrite 2i2. It's just in a nicer sounding room, which matters. But, think of every decision, which again, every decision that you make in the music production side is that 5% difference. And so you make all these different decisions that you do in order to create the sound that you're looking for. There's a story I shared recently where I was talking about speaking of analog tape, I do love analog tape, for anybody who's wondering if you couldn't tell. I used a Fostex R8, which is an 8-track 1/4-inch reel-to-reel tape machine.
Wow.
Yeah, for fidelity's sake, for
Yeah.
anybody that doesn't know, like the width of the tape, so like 2-inch 24
Yeah.
track was often considered to be like what you want.
Yeah.
And it's, think of like the amount of vertical space per track means the more fidelity that you would have, right? And so when you take a 2-inch machine and you shrink that down to a 1/4-inch machine and you try to shove 8 little tracks in there, your fidelity isn't fidelity.
It doesn't exist. Yeah, it's
right.
just noise sometimes.
And in a studio that I worked as an assistant engineer in, we had this one guy that came in and he was like, I want to make a record that sounds like it was made in the 1970s. And we were like, okay. And my experience at that point in time was really just recording like pop punk and indie rock and some hardcore stuff. We did a lot of metal, and so like those techniques, like I chose a lot of the things I chose because I was going for those techniques. So when he was like, I need to make a record that sounds like it was made in the 1970s, I was like, I don't know how to do that.
I got to look up what this looks like. Yeah, that's different.
Right.
Totally different mic choices, different compressor EQ choices. Yeah.
And on that note, like what we did was we got into a studio with one of the nicer sounding rooms. It wasn't like designed by a famous acoustician, but it was a good sounding room. And he decided to give it a much like tighter sound. So a lot more of like the gobos that you have in the studios. He brought them in a lot closer so that all the reverb would actually come from like an actual reverb
like
unit
a unit
that he had. Yeah. And
you're playing a lot. You're playing a lot like softer sometimes in those kind of situations as well, and so you're pushing the gains and compressors a lot more.
So like those were like choice after choice after choice.
Similar to the most recent Claro record that came out, actually, like very specific. If you haven't listened to it, it's actually really, really good. Or like Men I Trust make these very similar kind of decisions. Another great band in that genre, doing the like 50s, 60s drum like tight. I'm just going to barely tap on the drums, and like it's going to have that very specific sound, very tight.
Right. Yeah. Dr. Dog. That's another good one that makes like amazing sounding, like vintage sounding records. But yeah, we on the acoustic guitar, because he was acoustic singer songwriter, we like tried out a few, and he like had some like vintage condensers, and none of those really worked. I forgot what kind they were, but we ended up going with an SM57 pointed at the 12th fret, and routed that into like not the nicest preamps that he had. He had like these old preamps that were like tube preamps that like came out of like something that were re-racked in like a DIY kit, like that kind of thing. And he's like, I never used these. Let's just try it. Sick. And it was like, the top end just wasn't there. Meaning, what did we have to do? We had to get onto the EQ and crank it up. And so we had the sound of a cranked EQ. We had the sound of like an old dynamic microphone. That's 57 is not that old, but like. And then instead of routing that,
consistent through the years. Though.
Exactly. And then instead of routing that into the Pro Tools, because we had the HD system, we routed it to that Fostex, the R8. And we had a Studer. And so the whole time that he's making these choices, I was just sitting there like, okay, we have better stuff though. Like, and I just kept thinking that in my head. And again, I was like, at this point in time, early 20s, like I knew about production, but I only knew what I learned in school, which is modern techniques.
Yeah.
And he basically was like, we are doing everything we can to make this sound like it was Cat Stevens that recorded this. And I was like, cool, okay. And it just was all of those choices added up together to just give it just the right amount of smoke and vibe and just like haziness and less like clarity and punch and bigness. And it really ended up working out really well.
That's really cool.
And and so I think about that now, and I'm like, so when to answer your question, is it the producer? Is it the studio? Is it the gear? It is all of those things. But I think one of the things that shortcuts a lot of that is just home recording, using your whatever interface and whatever condenser you have, and then sending that to a mix engineer where they take it and just run it through, the treatment, and then everything just starts sounding like Bruce Switteen would have cursed it from his grave, compressed to hell and everything else.
Yeah.
Did you find that quote, by the way?
No, I didn't find that quote. I'm gonna find it. Okay. You look for it for sure.
I'm looking for it right now.
My goal is to find him saying it later, like on an interview or something. But I think on top of, the idea of working in like going to a studio, working in a studio. I mean, so like I work out of a studio here in town. Sometimes it's I kind of mothership model it, where it's like I have my space here at the house, and then like I'm an engineer at another studio, and I kind of work there sometimes if I need to track drums, and like I'll get some sessions from there and stuff. And we're seeing a massive uptick in people wanting like normal studio sessions, like not in a bedroom. They want the experience, one, of being in a studio, and maybe they'll write with a producer in a bedroom studio or like a small, project studio, or even like a really nice small studio, but they want the experience of coming in with, I mean, we have players that have played on like all sorts of great, I mean, we mainly do like Southern rock and country and like bluegrass stuff, and so I mean, we've had guys playing on Leanne Rimes records, we have guys playing on Montgomery Gentry records, we have guys playing on like the heavy hitting like 90s and 2000s country records at our spot, which is great. Like, we're blessed to have that specifically. Number one, that's a very weird thing to have here in South Carolina, but like we want these people want to hire them to come in, to be in the studio, to track with these guys, to have them not only elevate their talent, because their talent's incredible, but also like work in a fully kitted out SSL room with all these mics and stuff, and hear them played really, really well, and then work with guys that have 15 years of playing at a high level experience, and that entire thing, they walk out being like, oh my gosh, I'm coming back for a whole album.
I mean, yeah. When I think of like my favorite sounding records, not necessarily favorite records, like the
and
ones that I listen
also
to all the time.
Those are all tracked at the same time.
Yeah. Oh,
so
man,
like drums, bass, keys, drum, and guitar all being tracked at the same time in one room.
I mean, I'm not the only person that feels this way. All right, so I got a couple things to say. So, like, man, what a great combo. So, you really just know how to get me to go off on these tangents. But like, I know I'm not the only person that feels this way. Like, it's 2 a.m., you're scrolling on TikTok, you just had your late night pee, it's not time to go to sleep yet, and you're scrolling through, and you find somebody performing something, and you are just sucked in, and you're like, oh my God, that was incredible. And then you go to their profile, and then you look at their Spotify, and you listen to it, and you're like, oh, what the hell? Like, this is not what I just listened to.
Yeah.
The human element gets removed, right? And you're just like, oh gosh, I'm not the only person that feels that way. I have actually been like looking at the comments section of a lot of artists that have been like, just playing a guitar and singing their song and comparing that to, what they're, putting out on Spotify, like their produced record and stuff. And a lot of people are saying, release this audio on Spotify.
Yeah.
I just want to listen to this, not whatever that was.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing that in some form or fashion. People are saying that a lot. And I'm like, okay, that's a good sign. Like, I think that means that people are ready for something that is real. And so, like, not saying that, the produced method wasn't real, but like when I think of my favorite sounding records, like I'll just throw some out here that are my favorites. And again, this will show you who I am. I'm not shy about it. Like Weezer produced a record called Pinkerton that will forever live in my like top 5 of like my favorite sounding records of all time. It is so live and so punchy and incredible, recorded in multiple different studios, all using 2-inch tape. The majority of it was tracked live. And then it was mixed by JJP, Jack Joseph Puig, at Ocean Way Studios in Nashville. And it's like, that is a whole lot of gear that would cost people millions of dollars. There's no way that you could recreate that kind of sound fully and completely using just your modern digital stuff inside of your basement studio. Hello from my basement studio. Like, that is a thing that's really hard. And then another one of my favorite sounding records of all time is actually by a band called the Dirty Projectors. And they produced a record that is much cleaner, much more produced, much more polished. But like the drums in that record sound like I am standing in the room with that drum kit. And it's like, that is the type of thing that does require a really, really nice room with really nice mics that you can, maybe you take those overheads, maybe you raise them up just a couple of feet so that you can catch more of that sound of the room. You know, like those types of choices are made for the record that really do bring it out. And like, oh, it's an amazing thing. At the same time, and this is kind of where everything, stick with me, everybody, because I promise I'll make a point, which is there's other records that sound like they're recorded on a 4-track tape machine. Like I think of the early Bright Eyes records and things like that, which again spoke to my 13-year-old heart at the time. And like those records will forever be some of my favorites, or Elliott Smith's first couple records too. Like those records sound amazing, and there's something that makes them more genuine because they have that tape hiss. Just like if you're looking at an old photograph that was taken on an old film camera, like you look for that grain, just the way that you look for tape hiss and, you know, the texture, the clicks, ticks, and pops from a vinyl record, like those types of things. Like all of those are just choices that we can all make, and we don't have access to a lot of the things that can make all of those choices for us. And so therefore producers and rooms and SSL consoles, if you need them, and other times 4-track tape recorders when you need them, are just tools of the trade. Oh yeah. Rant over.
No, that's right. what a great convo. No, I think to encompass and kind of start landing it, I think I'm seeing a large push for slower intake, slower output, like kind of slower across the board. Or seeing people, like I said, like literally one of the number one books in business right now is about slow productivity. It's about knowing when to work hard, but also when to not. And there's, you know, big books right now, Unsubscribe, like people cleaning up their feeds, people learning how to put things down, the push of and the rise of things like light phones, the longer content like podcasts, all of these things that it's okay if you don't have the output and you just need to take a break. Like me and you just both came off of breaks, of doing a bunch of content stuff, like for different reasons. I'm sure you just needed a break. Because you were in the middle of job transitioning and a bunch of other things, I'm sure. And like for me, it was I had physically no time. Like physically, there was not enough time in the day for me to, because I started a second business this year. So for me to start a second business, also keep up with production and work and mixing work, be a dad, have a family. And
that's huge.
Like all of these things, it's like it just doesn't fit. Now I'm blessed to be able to make the money to be able to say no. I will recognize that. I also put in the work when I did have the time. And so there's something to be said for that as well. Same for you, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, okay, so first off, question. What is the second business that you started? If you don't mind me asking.
The podcast business.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah. It's called 101 Media, and we do podcasts, and this is this very big side tangent, but I see, because of the thing that sparked this conversation is I pay attention to a lot of things happening on the internet. I see a big push in longer form content, meaning podcasts, or well-produced content coming back, like high quality produced content coming back. And so businesses suck at both of those things. And and business suck at short form as well, but businesses suck at short form in a different way. So I'm seeing a lot of marketing dollars from companies come into we want to market on short form content. We don't want to market on traditional platforms, and like TV, radio, all that kind of stuff. You know, even Hulu, Netflix, those are going to social. Their dollars are going to social. And so I was like, oh, I know how to do all this stuff. I'm going to build a company that does it. And so it's worked.
That's really smart.
So, and it's working. First year, it's done pretty well. So, but anyway, like all of those things, and thank you. I am still keeping up with all of my things. I have my family and I have my friends, and I have those two things. But me 4 years ago, when I wasn't making enough money to make ends meet, didn't have the luxury of saying, hey, I need to step back.
Right.
And so it's like I recognize the luxury that I have as well.
Yeah, there's a privilege to it. Yeah, one of the things that really kind of hit home for me was something by the great Tony Robbins said this, which, yeah, I mean, that dude's crazy too. I don't know. I had it written down, but I can't find it. But he said, most people overestimate what they can do in 1 year, but they drastically underestimate what they can do in 10. Ooh. And I think about that. Yeah, right? God. And for anybody who's gone through like the burnout, it's like, I don't know if you deal with this. I know I do, like personally. When I find myself not doing something, I feel like I'm wasting an opportunity. Like, it is tough to take that step back. Like, my wife knows. Like, I mean, like, we just got back in town from a wedding. Like, I literally haven't showered. This is like dance floor sweat that you see. I had to double check my phone to make sure this wasn't the same shirt that I wore last time I was on this podcast. Like, I mean, I got the camera set up. We are good to go. Yes, made it. But like, I mean, like, I am one of the busiest people I know. And same, like, I've got a 3-year-old daughter, and I've got, full-time job. I've got side hustle stuff that I do. And I also try to have some sort of creative hobby so that I can reset, so that I can have enough energy to put into those creative types of things as well. And so it's like, gosh, like going for a photo walk, like just enjoying photography, which I very much do. Like, that's almost impossible, like it's really tough. And so, yeah, when you find yourself at those crossroads of like everything in your life is kind of surrounded by the productivity of produce, put out content, promote yourself, never waste an opportunity. Like, having that, like, I mean, we talked about Casey Neistat. He has a tattoo that literally says "do more" on his arm. Like that was the same type of inspiration I had when I was like producing stuff and trying to get myself out there, because it's like, it is tough. Like, let's just be honest. It's, in a capitalist society where no one has been paid less in the history of this country, really, outside of, I don't know, maybe the beginning of the country. But like, we do live in this capitalist, world, and you do have to play by those rules and survive in it, as long as those rules are created by those that are much more powerful than you. So, you've got to monetize your hobbies. You need to hustle, and that hustle will burn the candle at both ends.
It will, but and there's a thing to be said. What we said before of looking at the Neistats and the Hormozis and the VRVs of like insane output. All of those people, you don't have to be those people. Those people have $1 million teams built around them.
Indeed. Yeah.
Like, even Neistat has an editor.
Okay, so Casey actually has taken pride in saying he doesn't hire editors.
He had a second shooter. Sorry, he had a second shooter.
Yeah.
And it was Dan.
Yeah.
who works for Mr. Beast now. He works for Beast Philanthropy, which those videos are amazing.
They are. And like his he just recently released a video that was so amazing, and I put together a class
on Dan's channel.
Yeah, that was, I think it's just like Fuck Film School or something like that, or whatever it's called.
Yeah, it's like a 2-hour video where it's like, here's everything I learned about film school.
Everyone who's producing longer form content needs to watch that. It's incredibly insightful and amazing. So I put together a course for Matotek for social media content production and strategy, and I used his video in my class because it's that good. So I was using that video to teach a college level course on these things. So like, it is, everyone that is interested should go watch it. It's technical, but it's so good.
It's very technical. I started watching it, and he got like to the first little section of it, and I was like, I gotta watch this with a pen and paper later. I can't do this right now.
I quite literally at Matotek clocked in so that I could get paid for my time, so that I could justify watching it. Because
you should, because it's a lot. But even he, at a small level, had a second person. Not everybody can afford to have, the Hormozi massive media empire, the Gary Vee massive media empire.
Indeed.
You could just say, hey, I'm going to do my best, what I can do, and then be okay with not being like constantly being on and turning out that much output.
And to quote Gary Vee on this exact subject, which is kind of funny and weird and meta all at the same time, which is he says comparison is the thief of joy. You know, which is absolutely true. Which
and your output doesn't define your self-worth.
No, absolutely not. It doesn't define your self-worth. Neither does your input of whatever you make monetarily. It does not define your self-worth, which I think that is also a lesson that's really tough to learn as well.
For sure.
Is like, comparison is the thief of joy. No one's perfect at it. If you are, please let me know how to be perfect because I strive. But it's like, when you talk to friends, family members, when you see them at social events, things like that, like at the wedding, and seeing like just how well some people are doing. That's amazing. And I strive to do well and to take care of my family and all those things. But ultimately, your monetary input also does not define your self-worth, just like your creative output doesn't define your self-worth. These are broad philosophy things that I think we all need reminders of as much as possible.
Well, dude, thanks so much for coming on and having this deep philosophical conversation with me.
Absolutely. To all the listeners, please buy our self-help book that we're currently in the process of writing.
No, that was good. I love having these kind of conversations. And I've also been like very into just learning more about philosophical thoughts and thinking about myself more and thinking about like abstract, ways of doing business or, looking at people who do business differently and like being like, I wonder why that works for them. And like, I see that permeating through everything now more and more. I feel
like the thing that I need most in my life is like, I just, unsolicited advice. Like, I just want out of context, unsolicited advice. Please, when you watch this video, when you see these clips, I just want comments of like your best unsolicited advice that may or may not apply to the situation. Those are my favorite things in the world.
Yeah. Just hit it in the comments. Hit us with your best, generic random advice.
Yep, which like I've got a document that I'm quite literally like looking at and scrolling through as we're having this conversation, and don't worry, I won't hit you with these random little nuggets, but like they're my favorite things in the world. I would love to put your contribution to that document. So please,
while you're doing that and down there, go ahead and hit the subscribe button while you're down there. And
button,
and the we got to do the household cleanup duties.
Absolutely. And then make this podcast go like fully viral. That way I can 100% just take this as a full-time job as the guest co-host of this podcast.
Of a hyper niche audio podcast.
That's right. Hyper niche audio philosophy. Social
awareness.
Oh God. Yeah. Social awareness. All the things. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, dude, thanks so much for coming on the show with me today, dude, and having a conversation.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, we'll have to do it again. I'm sure it will happen. I'm sure it'll happen at some point before Josh comes back. I'll be like, you want to do another one?
Yeah, why not? Why the hell not?
Why not?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. Well, listeners, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Go follow Andrew at Andrew, I believe it's _Chapman. On everything, I believe. I don't know. If you search Andrew Chapman, you'll probably find him.
You will. Yeah, it's either going to be the account about audio, the account about veganism, or the account about photography. I have many. Andrew Chapman Music on Instagram, Andrew Chapman Music on YouTube, or just go to Matotek YouTube channel. I produce videos for them sometimes too. And all the things. You know how to do it. I appreciate you. Subscribe to us and
later.
Things. Deuces, gooses.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Home Studio Hangout podcast. If you could take the time to like, subscribe. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other audio platform, go ahead and make sure you're subscribed, and also leave a rating and a review. It helps the show get out to new people, and we're trying to grow every single week. Once again, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Home Studio Hangout podcast, and we'll see you next week.